You know that feeling, right? You get a test back and you just think, well, that's that. Too late to fix any of this now. For decades, that's pretty much how assessment has worked in a ton of classrooms. But what if we could flip that on its head? What if we could transform testing from this final verdict into a powerful, ongoing conversation? Today, we're going to dive into how to turn every single assessment into a launch pad for actual learning.
Okay, so it really boils down to the simple but powerful comparison. On one side, you've got the old way, the learning autopsy. The final exam that tells you what went wrong after the fact when it's already way too late. But on the other side, you've got the checkup. And this is the whole idea behind something called assessment for learning, or AFL for short. It's all about guiding the learning process while it's actually happening in real time.
All right, part one, the classroom's blind spot. So what is the actual problem we're trying to solve here? Well, it all comes down to this idea of a blind spot in the classroom. We're talking about those tricky, hidden misunderstandings that, traditional tests just fly right past, until the unit's over and it's way too late to do anything about it.
See, here's the thing. A teacher can give the most amazing, perfectly planned lesson, but students can still be holding on to these really powerful, incorrect ideas that just block anything new from getting in. So the real challenge here isn't just about teaching better. It's about seeing what students are actually thinking more clearly and doing it in the moment.
Think about these for a second, because they're super common. In science, a lot of us just intuitively feel like a heavier object has to fall faster than a lighter one, right? And in math, we learn early on that multiplying makes a number bigger, which is true until you suddenly run into fractions. These aren't just simple little mistakes. No, they're really deep-seated misconceptions that a final exam at the end of a unit might not ever even pick up on.
So, if that's the problem, how in the world do we fix this blind spot? Well, that brings us to part two, a GPS for learning. This is where assessment for learning really comes in. And honestly, the best way to think about it is as a kind of navigation system, like a GPS but for the classroom, guiding every single learner to where they need to go.
So what is it exactly? Well, the key is right there in the middle of the definition, the word during. AFL is not about some big, scary test at the very end. Nope, it's something that's woven into the very fabric of teaching. It's this continuous loop of gathering evidence of what students know and then adjusting the plan on the fly.
Yeah, let's stick with that GPS metaphor, because it's pretty much perfect. A GPS doesn't just ping you when you've arrived, right? Of course not. It gives you constant feedback. It reroutes you when you take a wrong turn, and it shows you the best way to get there from where you are right now. That is exactly what assessment for learning does for a student. And this whole GPS idea is captured perfectly in a framework from a researcher named Dr. Sadler. He basically said that for a student to improve, they need to know three things, just like you do when you're navigating. First, where are you going? That's your destination or the learning goal. Second, where are you right now? That's your current location, your current understanding. And the most important one, third, how do you actually get there? Those are the turn-by-turn directions, the actionable feedback that closes the gap. Now, this whole process, all this guidance, it happens in what you could call the sweet spot for learning. A famous psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, called it the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. Just think of it like this. It's that magic space between what a student can already do all by themselves and what's still way too hard for them. Assessment for learning is what acts as the guide inside that zone, giving just the right amount of targeted help to bridge that gap.
So remember those turn-by-turn directions we just talked about? Well, that comes in the form of really effective feedback. And researchers Hattie and Timperley boiled it down to three simple but super powerful questions that good feedback should always answer. Where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? See? This is what turns feedback from just a grade on a paper into an actual useful roadmap.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. Now we get to the really fun part, the how. Part 3 is all about the AFL toolkit. What does this stuff actually look like when you walk into a classroom? Let's open up the toolkit and see. So at its heart, AFL is built on these 5 core strategies. It all starts with making the learning goals and the success criteria totally crystal clear. Then, teachers use all these clever techniques to figure out what students are really thinking. From there, they give feedback that actually moves learning forward instead of just judging it. And this is a huge one. They get students involved in assessing their own work and their friends' work. And all the while, the teacher is constantly adapting the lesson based on all this evidence. Okay, that list can sound a little abstract, so to make this feel really real, let's just zoom in on one of these techniques. It's honestly one of my favorites because it's so simple, but it is incredibly powerful. It's called the hinge question.
So picture this. A teacher is right in the middle of an algebra lesson. They pause for a moment and put a multiple choice question, just like this one, up on the board. Now, in less than 60 seconds, just by seeing which options the students pick, that teacher gets an instant snapshot of the entire class's understanding. They know immediately who gets it and who doesn't. And that's why it's called a hinge question, because the teacher's very next move, whether they review the concept or move on, literally hinges on how the students answer. So cool.
And of course, hinge questions aren't just for algebra. This whole toolkit is designed to make student thinking visible, no matter the topic in math or science. So for part 4, let's look at how we can put this theory into practice with a couple more great examples. Okay, for science, there's this fantastic model called Predict, Observe, Explain, or POE. It's so simple. Before they do any experiment, students have to predict what they think is going to happen. Now, this first step is absolutely huge because it forces all their prior knowledge and all those hidden misconceptions we talked about right out into the open. Then they observe what actually happens. And finally, they have to explain any differences between their prediction and what they saw. That's it. That's where the real deep learning kicks in.
And seriously, the toolkit is just massive. In math, you've got things like number talks, where kids are verbally sharing how they solved a problem, or error analysis, where the whole class learns by digging into a common mistake. In science, you can use concept cartoons that show different characters arguing about a scientific idea to spark a debate. And even something as low-tech as a mini whiteboard for every student can totally transform a classroom, because everyone's thinking becomes visible to the teacher, all at once.
Okay, let's zoom back out for a second. Because when you start putting all these different tools and strategies together, something much bigger starts to happen. This isn't just a collection of neat teaching tricks. No, it's a fundamental shift in the entire culture of a classroom. It's a move away from just grading and toward real, honest-to-goodness growing. And this right here is the absolute crucial shift. The whole goal stops being about judging and ranking students. Instead, assessment becomes the engine that drives improvement. It stops being about failure and starts being about progress. It becomes about building confidence instead of creating anxiety.
And the payoff here is just massive. You see students who finally get the why behind what they're learning. You have teachers who can give the exact right help to the exact right student at the exact right time. But honestly, the most important thing is that students start to own their learning. They're not just passengers anymore. They're active participants, and that does wonders for their motivation and their confidence.
This quote really sums it all up, doesn't it? When students are actually engaged in their own assessment, through self-reflection, giving feedback to their peers, really understanding the goals, they stop being just these passive receivers of information. They become true partners with their teacher in the whole learning process.
So I'll just leave you with this one final thought. What if every single assessment, every test, every quiz, every little question wasn't about a final verdict? What if instead it was the start of a conversation about how to get better? That right there is the simple but incredibly powerful promise of assessment for learning.